totally for granted here in the first world, and yet there was a time when it was really absent. And our question now is, what do we do with that abundance? That's actually the question that entrepreneurship is designed to solve. So here's the kicker. Entrepreneurship is management. And I know that, yeah, I always look around for the nasty looks at that point. It's like, could you have a juxtaposition of two more, antagonistic ideas? Entrepreneurship is cool, it's done by people in the fancy, wearing the cool glasses, and they got the jeans and the whole look. And management is done by, I don't know, guys in the gray suits who they were accountants, or I don't even know what. Guys from the 1950s who somehow have survived, like vestigial dinosaurs. But both of those images, are totally wrong. And so we have to get past that. I already talked about what's wrong with the entrepreneurial image, but the management image is totally unfair too. If it wasn't for the exceptional work of general managers, the 20th century general managers who made possible the global supply chains that feed and clothe us, we would all be dead. So how about a little bit of respect for management? And secondly, let's go all the way back to the question about what is a startup. A startup is a human institution designed to create something new. Right? It is not a product. It is an organization. It is a coordinated activity of many people towards a shared goal. In other words, the person who manages that organization is the entrepreneur. That's us. It's just that the kind of management we do is different than the management that the general managers of the 20th century did. It's not better than what they do, it's not worse than what they do, it's simply different. And every time in my career I have seen, trained, certified MBAs, transplanted into a startup to just execute the MBA game plan, this is what we get. Because this is what general management is supposed to look like. Unfortunately, that's not what we look like. We have this problem of extreme uncertainty. That is, we don't know who the customer is, we don't know who our market is, we don't know if anybody will ever want to use the product that we're building. And what we need is a set of new management practices that are specifically geared to entrepreneurship. The first such concept is called the pivot. Anyone already sick and tired of hearing the word pivot applied to startups? I'm sorry. I did not intend this as a consequence of what I was doing. I think if there's one buzzword that has become by far the most overused in the year 2010, it is the word pivot. I knew we were in major trouble when I saw this. This is from the New Yorker a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you can read, oh, the caption's cut off, I'll read it to you. I'm not leaving you, I'm pivoting to another man. So we have a word that has entered the zeitgeist, I apologize. I mean, at that point, what are we even doing? I don't know. But I want to apologize for inventing new jargon. I mean, first of all, I'm a talking head now, so that's what we do, we invent jargon. But it's actually a very important thing. In order for us to talk about entrepreneurship, we need to name the concepts that make up entrepreneurial management, and we need to name them with specificity so that we know what the hell we're talking about. And when we're giving each other advice, we're not just talking past each other and saying things of the form, well, I did X in the past, then I got rich. So if you do X, you'll get rich. Right? You're taking a logic class, well, there's fallacies galore there. So what is a pivot actually, if it's not what's in the cartoon? Here's my definition. When entrepreneurs encounter difficulty, they don't give up and go home, but they also don't persevere the plane right into the ground. The great entrepreneurs have this amazing combination of perseverance and adaptability. So we use the metaphor of the pivot from basketball, right? Keeping one foot firmly rooted in what they had done in the past, what they've learned, and changing one other thing about the business in a systematic fashion. And because of the pivot, if you look at the true stories, not the crap you read in the press, but the true stories of the successful startups, you will notice they all take this remarkably circuitous path that only makes sense a little bit in retrospect, right? Because I'm sure you can find plenty of people who say, well, obviously, of course we knew when we started PayPal and we were doing digital cyber cash for PDAs, obviously we would become the #1 payment provider for eBay, for the sale of Beanie Babies. We always had that in mind, as one of our many domains of world domination. But come on, who really believes those stories, right? It's much more likely that they had no idea what was going to be used for. And that if you look at the actual record, they spent a remarkable amount of time trying to save the PDA cyber cash business, even while their email payments business was flourishing. But they had no idea that they were going to be in auctions at all. What those stories have in common is this kind of common thread of vision through the whole thing. But the specific instantiations are really quite wildly different. And you'll see that in startup after startup after startup. And that's the pivot. And the premise of the lean startup is very simple. If we can reduce the time between pivots, we can increase the odds of finding product market fit before we run out of money. Because what matters in a startup is not how much runway you have, it's not how much burn you have left. The units of runway are not months of cash on hand. It is actually, how many pivots do I have left? And you can extend the runway for a startup, yes, by raising more money, but also by being able to learn the same amount per pivot faster. So if you shrink the time between them, it's like getting more life for your startup practically for free. Doesn't that sound good? If all this talk of pivoting and iteration sounds familiar, it should. It's because of these two guys. Just another little history lesson. This is W. Edwards Deming, and this is Taichi Ono. Taichi Ono is the father of the Toyota production system. Deming was an American who went to Japan after World War II, and he started to teach the Japanese about statistical control methods, the importance of fast feedback, batch size. We don't have to get into a lot of it now. But Taylor's insight was that we should treat work as a system. But he didn't actually have any systems theory, and he didn't know any statistics, because modern statistics had not been invented when he was born. So actually, his first attempts at scientific management were relatively poor by our modern standards. And the current dominant management paradigm that runs, like I said, most of the global supply chains of the world is this one. We call it lean manufacturing, lean production. It was invented really by these guys and their cohorts in Japan. This idea has at its root a very simple question. Can we learn to tell the difference between which activities we do in a business are value creating and which ones are wasteful? Which is, again, one of those obvious questions. Why wouldn't everybody ask that? But if you went back and saw General Motors plant in 1970, you would be like, no one's asking that question. Right? It wasn't important. Why? Because we already know what to do. It's already been specified by a brilliant manager who put it all in the individual boxes, and we're just following the rote procedures. The insight of lean production is that if we do that whole system in an iterative, low batch size way, we can actually increase the quality of the product, increase the speed at which we get new products to market, all without sacrificing quality. It's very exciting. When this idea was handed down to me, it looked like this. Here's one of our gurus, Kent Beck from the software business. He's still alive. This is extreme programming, one of the agile development methodologies. Who here practices some form of agile right now? Just quick show of hands. Pretty much everybody. Okay, good. This is the state of the art in how software is developed, and pretty much every industry has its own version of this feedback loop that has discovered in the last 10 years. Agile is a huge step forward in terms of how products are built, because it changes our unit of progress from that old, advancing the plan, to here we call it a line of working code. It's right there in the Agile Manifesto. And the idea is that all the activities that we do in a software company that don't contribute to a line of working code, like endless meetings, planning meetings, prioritization meetings, quality meetings, design review meetings, all those meetings, but also like the specification documents that nobody reads, the testing manuals that constantly go stale, the code that has no unit test, therefore is buggy and tends to just turn itself off sometimes for no reason. All of that constitutes waste, and we can drive it out of our system. And that's actually all really good. But it's important to remember where Agile comes from. Agile is designed for a context where the problem is known, it's the solution which is unknown. So Agile actually has its roots exclusively inside the IT organizations of large companies. All of the members of the Agile Alliance, that's their background. And they solved a very important problem, because when software projects in IT shops are done using waterfall, they have something like a 60% mortality rate. We're not talking about fancy startups here, we're talking about like building a new accounting system to do payroll for your giant corporation. 60% of those projects never complete at all. So the lucky ones are the ones that come in way late and way over budget. With Agile, we can do something about that. But Agile is actually not that well adapted to startups, because the whole idea of Agile is that there's somebody out there who can be the product owner, the in-house customer, who can give you an authoritative answer to, well, how is this thing supposed to work? What are we building? And of course, in startups, who are you going to ask? If you're going to sit an in-house customer next to the engineer so that they can talk to them, who are you going to sit next to them if you don't yet know who the customer is? Yeah?
Is it automatically assumed when you say a line of working code that working implies a line of used code? Or actually, is there a difference between working code and used code?
Just hold that thought for a second. If your question's not answered at the end of this, then we can revisit it. But yeah, I mean, that's a very important question. Yeah?
What if you're building something that you needed in your previous job?
The question for everybody is what if you're building something that you needed in your previous job, so you are the customer?
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you're right that there are lots of other people like you, it's going to work great. But are you sure? Right?
I am,
yeah, I understand you're sure. But what about the people that work for you? Are they sure? What about the people who gave you money? Are they sure? And what about after you do version 1.0 and nobody uses it, except for you, of course, you love it. Like, will you still be sure? See, that's the issue, is it seems like a good idea, right? It always seems like a good idea, right? All entrepreneurs are gifted at having a vision and convincing people that for reasons X,